It is now 19 minutes after 7. This is Morning Express, and it's time for the State of the Nation. Now, on State of the Nation this morning, we look at the thin line between the judiciary and the executive that had been growing bold since the repeat election last year. The intended cooperation between the two has turned out into a Cold War that often degenerates into ugly outbursts. The latest friction between the two was occasioned by the deportation of self-proclaimed NRM General Miguna when the Interior CS appeared before the National Assembly Committee on National Security. He turned the heat on the judiciary, accusing it of harboring evil judges out to make the executive look bad. Not to mention that the officers in his ministry, including the Inspector General of Police and Migration PS, have, defied the court orders. The two arms of government have been reduced to enemies who cannot see eye to eye but must work hand in hand. So are they working to tear each other apart at the expense of very public that they are meant to serve? In studio this morning, as I indicated earlier, I have lawyer Ndegwa Njiru and also Professor George Wajakoya. And, we are going to be putting this into perspective. But before we even begin the discussion, gentlemen, welcome and good to have you this morning. Let's listen into what the CS had to say as he was being grilled.
We have gotten into an unholy relationship with a clique of activist lawyers and oppositionist civil society people, with the intention of humiliating the government, stalling the government, embarrassing the government, and making it impossible for the government to perform. One civil society activist in Kenya has obtained nearly 30 court orders, ex parte, 30 court orders, ex parte, from the court. He walks in, he gets an order, comes out. He walks in, he gets an order, comes out. In fact, he could even walk in today and say he wants an order so that all cabinet secretaries commit suicide.
All right, and that's what partly what the CS had to say as he was being grilled. And let me start with you, Professor Wajakoya. This, of course, is not a war that has started recently. Right from the nullification of the August 8th elections, we saw the executive, led by the president, actually coming out to say that he was not, made it very clear that he was not happy. And they say the key word was, we will revisit. And this has continued, and it seems not to be coming down. Your thoughts on this and possibly the danger that it puts us in as the people who are under the executive and the judiciary?
Actually, what Matiang'i is doing is what the president said, so he's just following what his master said. Matiang'i is the most shameful cabinet secretary who should actually be shown the door. How can you call lawyers evil, yet he himself is the most evil human being in the world? How did he inject? How was Miguna injected with that toxic?
According to him, he says that there are quite a number of things that even the lawyers had not read through before they came out to make the statements that they were making about
I am one of the Miguna's lawyers, and let him not lie. What is happening here is he defied the court order, he appealed against that court order, and then he went to Parliament, abdicating the Constitution, to explain if he could be called to go to Parliament and he could appear in Parliament to go and verify lawyers. Yet when he was summoned in court and he was served with court orders and he failed to appear in court, who is Matiang'i to go and abuse lawyers?
Is this because he attacked lawyers, or are we looking purely at the merit of what he had to say vis-a-vis what is happening in the country currently?
Well, the man purports to have a PhD. I don't know, I doubt his PhD, because any human being who has gone to the university and done research ought to do research.
Okay.
You cannot come up with lame excuses and stupid statements and go and vilify people when you have the mechanism, there is the process, there is the procedure for him to go to court as he went to court and then lay your claim by way of appeal. But then how would you now go further in contempt of court and use Parliament and go to Parliament to air your nonsense?
Okay. Njiru,
yes.
your thoughts, again, as a lawyer.
I think, this is in pursuit of what the president promised us immediately after the judgment of the Supreme Court, that we shall revisit. So all what is happening between the executive and the judiciary is in pursuit of that promise. Remember, the president was one of the very first person who downgraded and castigated the courts, to an extent of even calling them the Wakora. It's a Wakora thing. So when Dr. Matiang'i, I have no reason to doubt his PhD, says that there's somebody who is trying to injunct government, and the person injuncting government is caught, maybe this will marry together, will marry well with Professor's doubts as to how is Matiang'i defining government. Is he trying to distinguish the court from the executive? And does he understand how, or whether the so-called government has three arms? I am saying that whatever is happening is very, very unhealthy. It's unhealthy for the economy. It's unhealthy for the social perspective of the country. Even for the political perspective of the country, it's very unhealthy. So we must get a mechanism of trying to put down the temperatures. Remember now the political temperatures have gone down after the golden handshake. And the only thing that is now, it's between the institutional firefighting. And we must be able to get to see that these institutions works in harmony. When Matiang'i comes and says that there are some judges who have been placed in the judiciary to just injunct government, disorient government, disorganize government, what is he telling us? Is he telling us that these judges are not part and parcel of the system? And if he has evidence of some judges who are trying to do what he's alleging are doing, what are the other institutions that are supposed to check on them doing? For instance, does he understand that there is something called the Judicial Service Commission, which is responsible of checking on those so-called rogue judges? In my perspective, in my view, a judge is a judge. Once a judge issues an order, any person who is dissatisfied with that order understands the mechanisms of challenging that particular order. You cannot just go to Parliament and vilify the courts. Because the moment you do that, remember the courts are the ones that are meant in a democracy to stabilize the democracy. The moment you get to disorient and erode the confidence of the courts, you're telling the nation, and you're inviting the nation to start treading in the direction of anarchy. So it is very, very unfortunate for a minister of government who is being paid from public coffers. First of all, one, to disobey a court order. Two, to go and abuse the whole system in Parliament. Why would he not have the guts to go and say what he said in court when he was invited? All
right, Professor Ajakoya, evidently this is a slippery road that we are on right now as a country, because the judiciary really is meant to be the arbiter, as it were. Whenever there's a problem, that is meant to be the final word. But the executive evidently does not feel comfortable with either the judges or the rulings and all that. So what are some of the dangers that we're staring at right now?
First of all, we have a rogue parliament that is interfering with the judiciary. If the matter is in court, why would Parliament sit and call a minister to go and speak on the same matter? What kind of members of Parliament and what kind of caliber of members of Parliament do we have today? Did they learn from what happened in Pakistan when Zia-ul-Haq declared military decree? At the same time, there was Sharia law. And at the same time, there was the Constitutional Court in Pakistan, where the military decree outlawed the High Court judges from sitting. And I wish they could have learned on what happened in that particular country. This is now a country where ministers are appointed, are selected and confirmed by Parliament, not elected, to go and sing the whims of their masters. This system stinks. Matiang'i, of all the people, has failed to cage the police. He's done away with the police salaries. He's done away with salaries of disabled police officers. He's disoriented police. Let me finish it.
I just want us to move away from Matiang'i as a person, but look at the wider picture of what we are, where we are.
He has introduced a very important perspective in this issue. Parliament. It looks, and to me, that Parliament does not understand its mandate. One, when we had Parliament, the Westminster system of government, and most importantly, legislature, we had this respect that when a matter is, when a judge is seized of a particular matter, Parliament would automatically be injuncted from discussing that whole issue, not through a court injunction, but through the operation of the common law principles. One of the principles that was operative, and which ought to be operative even to date, is the principle called the sub judice. When a judge or a court is seized of a particular matter, there's no any other person is supposed to discuss them other than that particular court. Right. And then you can only be seized of discussion and debate subsequent to the delivery or the conclusion of that matter, or subsequent to the delivery of a decision by the court. So when Parliament calls and summons Matiang'i to discuss a matter that is pending in court, one, it tells me, one, that the chairman of that particular committee does not understand the principle of separation of powers. Two, he does not understand the role of Parliament insofar as exercising checks and balances is an issue and offering oversight. Remember, Parliament cannot offer oversight over the courts.
Correct.
But they can offer oversight over the executive. So if the summons that Matiang'i was answering to in the committee was in regard to offerings oversight insofar as the executive is concerned, then the same cannot be seen to be crashing with whatever is happening in court. So may I say this? We require to have an institutional introspective. Both Parliament must do something about itself, the executive must do something about itself, and to me, I want to immunize the court. For one thing, that the courts are enjoying what is called the principle enshrined in our Constitution, called the independence of the judiciary. Remember, the independence of the judiciary, as it previously were in the 1963 Constitution, has now changed. It has now become constitutionalized, that you cannot interfere with the dependency of a particular judge.
Correct.
And may you remember that the dependency we are talking about is not just about the delivery of the judgment. It's even about the dependence of the mind and the inability of the other government institutions, or whether it is a court of concurrent jurisdiction or higher jurisdiction or executive or the legislature, from interfering with the proceedings of that particular judge. So these committees must be able to understand their standing orders in Parliament. And the Speaker must also be able to guide Parliament in how they are supposed to exercise this so-called oversight. Let us not think that the issues of the principles enshrined in Article 10 of inclusiveness, public participation, transparency, and accountability are supposed to mutilate the independence of the judiciary. Yes.
All right, Professor, let me come to you. And we evidently have a challenge as a country. Reason being, it's not that we don't have institutions. It's not that we don't have laws in place. It's not that we don't have a constitution that is supposed to guide us. But evidently, whether we look at the executive, legislature, there seems to be a challenge in following those laws and the constitution. Where did the rain start beating us?
Well, let's go to the issue at hand. As my learned friend has articulated very excellently, I think I will want to attend to one of your classes. With such a brilliant, such a brilliant friend.
I'm really humbled, Professor.
Yes, the courts have never been wrong. If they have been wrong, then nobody has made a complaint.
And
if complaints have been made,
a channel to make those complaints.
If complaints have been made, then the Judicial Service Commission has taken precedent in matters of the former Deputy Chief Justice. You saw what happened.
Correct.
She slapped somebody, and then there was public outcry, and the procedure was followed. It was dealt with. But how can somebody somewhere come out and activate himself into what we call social or public interest activation? How would you come up and make judgment and say that these judges are socialist-oriented? There are people who are actually activist judges. Does he know the definition of an activist judge? An activist judge is divided into two. There is the red light judge who stops at the law, prescribes the law, and prescribes a sentence in synopsis in accordance with the prognosis of the law. And then there is what we call the green light judge, activist judge, who will look at the law and say, look, this man has stolen a mango and the sentence is 7 years. But what are other considerations when I'm sentencing this man? Would I want to send him for maximum 7 years? Or would I look into other considerations, the family, social outfit in society, what he's earning, and other considerations, and maybe send him for community service? That's what we call judicial activism in terms of social active litigation and public interest litigation as developed by India and Britain, respectively. But when a minister who has no idea, and I'm sorry to say this, a minister who has never gone to law school, who just comes up after eating nyama choma, and then he can think that he can talk to appease who, that is wrong. Now, when it comes to activism, lawyers have been known in the world to bring out the disparities and do away with the disparities in the following manner. We had John Marshall, we had Tajul Marshall, who came in the case of Board of Education, where he said segregation was bad, even though the law said that blacks and whites are not equal when it comes to seating arrangements on the buses and in schools. It was judicial activism that came in with Tajul Marshall and said the law should treat everybody equally. Now, if Justice Odinga can come in and say that putting somebody under a box, a person who has crossed horizontal and vertical lines and is in the country and making him not to appear before me is unconstitutional.
Okay.
Now, when it comes to where the reign started, of course, the reign started with Uhuru Kenyatta when he made a proclamation. Whether he was making that to please himself, we don't know, but the consequences are great. And that's why the likes of Matiang'i and the likes of the Field Marshal of Scenes of Crime, the MP for Gatundu South, who is always proclaiming things, and every time there is a scene of crime is there, and then something happens, it's happening. Thank you.
All right, where the rain started beating us.
Yes, and he has brought a very interesting argument, and this reminds me of what he taught me about the schools of law and the schools of thought. And for somebody to understand how a judicial officer thinks, or what influences that judicial officer to, first of all, make a particular finding in a particular manner, you need to understand which schools of thought it prescribes to. And as he says, there is, and I only want to deal with two schools. There is a school called the positivist school, which follows the law as written, as he has well put it. Then there is that other school called the realist school, which looks at the reality of the circumstances.
And the environment and all that.
And when you go to the issues of the orders that were issued, of the habeas corpus, first of all, they were issued by Justice Mutungi, Kimaru. They were then issued by Justice Chacha Mwita. They were then issued again by Justice Aburiri. And then they were then issued again by Justice Odunga. So there were four particular judges of three different divisions. Kimaru sits in the criminal division. Chacha sits in the constitutional division. Justice Aburiri and Justice Odunga sits in the judicial division. All these judges, they are all culminating into one thing: bring Miguna to court. And those are the orders called the orders of habeas corpus. They are enshrined in our constitution, and Article 25 says that the orders of habeas corpus cannot be limited. That means you cannot derogate the rights for somebody to be produced in court. Mike, we need to remember where this country has come from and the reason why we enacted Article 25. The reason was, what informed us most was the Kenyatta era and the Moi era, when we had a bit of problems in people not being brought to court at the right time. You remember we had issues of detention without trial during those particular times. So Kenyan said that we must have an order of habeas corpus in the constitution that you can go to court and make an application for it to be brought to court. When a judge issues an order of habeas corpus, he's responding to the reality of the times at that particular time, and that is a realist judge. And any judge who is presented an application of that nature must issue that order for somebody to be brought to court and for reasons of his detention be known to the world. So I am saying that the rain started beating us when we decided to get an autopilot away from the doctrines and the principles that we have taken dear unto ourselves and the creed of the Constitution.
Okay. And one of the interesting twists here, and it's also part of the headline that we have here this morning on the Daily Nation, Stop It, Raila warns Matiang'i on judges. So we have the opposition leader, Raila Odinga. Well, there are those who view him as the opposition leader. Others seem to view him differently. But let's just listen into what he had to say, because this again brings in a twist of where he stands in terms of defending the Constitution, and of course, given the infamous or famous handshake that we've talked about previously. But let's see what he had to say in regards to this.
With a 200,000 shillings fine hanging over his payslip this month for snubbing court summonses and disobeying 4 consecutive orders to produce now deported NASA activist Miguna in court, Interior Cabinet Secretary Dr. Fred Matiang'i walked into the National Assembly Committee on Administration and National Security with his bazooka locked to a target.
There is an evil clique of judicial officers working with activist lawyers and elements in the civil society who are determined to make sure that the executive branch does not function.
But the outburst has rattled opposition chief Raila Odinga and now threatens to break Odinga's newfound unity with Matiang'i's boss, President Uhuru Kenyatta. Odinga now terming the CS attack on the judiciary as reckless, unethical and highly irresponsible, and deviating from the Kenyatta-Odinga March 9th agreement to use all social and political platforms to foster reconciliation.
Each individual to take responsibility for his own actions, not pretending that it is government. Now we shall zero down on individuals, like the CS for Interior. There's a man that should be taken and be jailed.
One civil society activist in Kenya has obtained nearly 30 court orders, ex parte, 30 court orders, ex parte from the court. He walks in, he gets an order, comes out. He walks in, he gets an order, comes out. In fact, he could even walk in today and say he wants an order so that all cabinet secretaries commit suicide. You'll get the order.
But while the Matiang'i judiciary attack and direct affront at Justice George Odunga Court has evidently revived the frosty relations between the Kenyatta administration and the judiciary.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The Tuesday open display of weakness in the interrogating abilities of the Jubilee-dominated National Security Committee.
This is the time we should be working, but not talking about the issues of Miguna.
Evidenced by the multiple interruptions of Kiambaa legislator Paul Koinange, who chairs the committee, appears to cast a weighty burden on the judiciary in its future enforcement of adherence to the law amid these latest attacks.
I think the media cannot take this short.
This state of affairs also placing on the spot former appellate court president, now new Attorney General Kihara Kariuki, who took over at Sharia House at exactly the same time Matiang'i was attacking his former colleagues in the judiciary.
Justice Kihara, we expect him to do better than his predecessor. We expect him to live by the oath of his office, and we expect him to advise the government that the government is supposed to protect the Constitution and implement it to its letter.
We must be led by the Constitution of this country and the rule of law. And anybody here who is anywhere short of that has no room.
But with the executive's perpetual scorn at the courts and open disdain for judicial authority, the Kenyatta administration and the Chief Justice David Maraga-led judicial arm alike remain on the spotlight as Miguna continues his fight for a comeback. Muremi Mwangi, KTN News, Nairobi.
All right, Professor, looking at that, one of the possible reasons which has put us where we are today is the fact that if you have a good ear or you have favor with the powers that be, then regardless of what you do, you seem to get away with it. Is it about time that we had everybody pay for their own sin, as it were?
First of all, we don't really need to care about what happens here. What has happened there is very nice, and I really welcome it. Because
when you say
what
has
Kenyans
there,
are going to do right now in the diaspora and the social active groups in the diaspora, they will wait for those three culprits, the minister, the inspector general of police, and the immigration man, to go abroad. For example, if they went to Britain today, all Kenyans need to do is to actually petition the congressmen there or the politicians there to chase them away from there because of unsuitability. That's number one. Number two, it has also given room for Kenyans in the diaspora to lobby politicians to bar these guys from giving a visa going out of the country. And this happened 2 years ago when a similar situation happened in Guatemala, where a minister in Guatemala operated with impunity in Guatemala. He defied court orders.
But how will that help us as a
when he
country?
went to the US, I'm just giving an example. When he went to Florida, the Guatemalans in Florida petitioned the Florida statesman, and the man was actually expelled from the US. That's one way of looking at it, and I will welcome that. And I will be on the forefront of doing that, to making sure that that happens. But now, one other thing is that once you have been fined, and I stand to be corrected by my learned colleague, once you have been convicted, that remains on your record for life.
Absolutely. All right.
Yes, may I first of all begin by what the retired Raila Odinga said, Prime Minister. And we should not confuse that the handshake was meant to silence Raila.
Correct.
He still remains a person who should check on us anytime we go astray. So I commend him for having come out strongly to condemn whatever Dr. Matiang'i did, and of course for cautioning him to respect the institutions. So Kenya should not think that now because there was a handshake that we should get into a sleeping mode and Raila should mute completely. I urge him to continue checking and calling upon government to keep on checking itself. But now, on the issues of parliament again, on the issues of Matiang'i, on the issues of the IG and the immigration director, first of all, one thing I wondered is, and I asked Professor, is whether Matiang'i has audience, or those three culprits contemnus have audience before parliament. Remember, parliament is established by the constitution. Any minister or any person who is a state officer who violates a court order is not just violating a court order, is actually violating the constitution itself. Why? If you look at Article 1, Professor, it says power belongs to the people and shall exercise their sovereignty in accordance with the provisions of the Constitution. And it has created that this power is delegated into three arms of government: parliament, legislature, and the executive. Then when you go to Article 159, it says that judicial power is derived from the people. So when a judge of the High Court of Kenya, or even a magistrate issues an order, or even a chairman of a particular tribunal issues an order, he is exercising the sovereignty of the people because he's driving that sovereignty, that power from the people. So when you disobey an order issued by Justice Odinga or any other judge, you're actually not disobeying that order of a judge, but the authority of the Kenyan people.
Correct.
And therefore, because you're defying that authority of the Kenyan people, you cannot then purport to continue serving them. Because first of all, you've held Kenyan people out in contempt. Why should you then continue being paid taxes by the same Kenyan people? And that is why the institution of parliament is a very important institution in this juncture. If it was if parliament was ought to be what it is, if parliament was to be impartial, they are now supposed to have actually censored all those three individuals. But are we able to do it? No. Why? Because we operate on the principles of tyranny of numbers. And that invites me, Professor, to one limp, whether we need to interrogate the architectural design of our constitution and the way we run our elections. Yesterday I had a thought, and I realized that parliamentary elections, governorship elections, or all elections, all of them are consumed by the presidential elections, such that we are not able to separate we are not able to get the clean and the creme de la creme in the system, because the whole system is usurped by the presidential campaigns. Can I just give an example? When the president is campaigning in Kirinyaga County, he campaigns and says, "Niletee watu wangu parliament." So this thing of niletee watu wangu means that watu wangu cannot check on the arbitrariness of the presidency. And then we need to separate those two things so that the elections in this country are not collinear. Collinear in the sense that we do not conduct the elections on the same date, so that elections of the executive are separated and the elections of the legislature are separated, so that we are able to get people who can be able to create checks and balances and oversight in our parliament. This idea of tyrant of numbers, if we stagger our elections, will then die. But as long as we have this status remaining, nobody will ever be able to check on the executive or other arms of government.
All right, Professor, do you agree that that's a way forward? We need to wind up shortly. And it looks like the problem we have here is not just the institutions, but those people who we have mandated to have oversight over those institutions. For instance, if it's Parliament, we expect our parliamentarians now to stand up to be counted when it comes to issues like this, but they seem to be swallowed in the whole issues themselves.
Right now, Parliament has become a dating agency where women MPs can date anyone and then they go away scratch-free. Number two...
And get conned out of money.
Yeah, sorry, unfortunately, I'm one of the lawyers for that new case. Number two, I would like to comment on Raila Odinga's statement, but I would want to take a notch higher. Even if he comments now, it's quite too late. Miguna died for him. Has he ever issued a statement from that time when all these issues are going on? What guarantees are there that Miguna is going to come back? Thank you very much.
All right. Degwa?
Maybe as I sum up, I had a discussion with, and I can quote him because he's my friend, the MP for Kikuyu, Honorable Ishongwa. And I urged him and asked him, you guys, are you now going to check and censor a person who has disobeyed a court order? Or are you going just to concentrate on censoring a person who has sent someone for leave for mishaps in Kenyatta Hospital? I was of course referring to Sisiri Karaoke. And then he told me, Matiang'i is one of the guys we need to have. But then I compared Matiang'i and better democracies like America. And I compared the CS there for security and internal affairs and our Matiang'i here. Then the idea that we have is that we need to have a Matiang'i who resembles Mishuki insofar as competitiveness is an issue when you're governing a ministry like the one that is governing. Then I asked myself, how many wars is America fighting? Yet their CS still remains diplomatic and still remains faithful to the Constitution. So if it is necessary for us to have a minister for internal affairs or security or defense having the character of Matiang'i, then Matiang'i fits well in a democracy like America. It's where they need that competitiveness. What am I saying? I'm saying that whichever ministry that you are in, it requires some bit of sobriety and some bit of diplomacy and some bit of maturity insofar as the respect of the rule of law is an issue.
All right, Professor, one of the lessons that you take home out of all this, because come again another 5 years, we probably will have the same issues that we have had for a long time if we're not learning lessons. What is our take home when we see what's happening right now in regards especially to elections?
Well, these people have abdicated the Constitution. And secondly, it gives me leeway to speak because I'm going to the UK and US and I'm going to address several members of parliament in UK. And I'm also going to address my congressman in Texas, in Arizona, on these inequities that have been happening. I want the issues raised by the department.
What's our lesson as Kenyans from what
that's why I'm saying. That's why I'm saying. I've learned from it and I'm going to address this issue outside the country. Let people say that we're washing our dirty linen. We can't live in a society like this one. We are doing so good. And all of a sudden, things have just gone out of the window. Why can't the president come up and say, enough is enough, let us move on, let us return Miguna, and also reprimand some of these ministers? Why can't Parliament get out of this mentality of dating agency and come out to its realization
of what they're supposed
under
to
the
do.
Constitution.
All right. Ndegwa, what is your lesson out of all this? And the reason why I'm asking for that lesson is if we're not careful, then we're going to have this recurring again and again and again. And unfortunately, it is the Kenyan that suffers.
One, Kenyans need to think whether or not, when it comes to establishing government, they need to be driven by their tribal cocoons in forming government, or they want to form government in regards or being informed by quality. Secondly, Kenyans need to understand that the moment the judiciary is watered down, they will be on their own. The moment court orders will not be respected, and you have somebody whom you want to evict from your property, you have somebody who has refused to pay your rent, somebody is sitting on your land, and court orders are not being respected, the Kenyans must understand that this will have a serious impact even on their political, social, and economic. Economic in what sense? An investor will not come to invest in Kenya if tomorrow he goes to get an order and the order will not be respected, if the order is injuncting government. So even this one is going to mutilate our standing in the international community. And that is Prof is propounding that theory, that even the international community needs to come and look at, have a focus on how we are conducting our affairs. The other lesson that we must learn is we must have a self-introspection on the architecture of the Constitution and think whether or not this is now the time to amend it. Let us not just amend the Constitution and look at the political provisions. Let's also look at the social impact the Constitution will have and whether it is addressing our challenges as it is today. Let us look at how we establish Parliament. Parliament is supposed to offer oversight. Is our Parliament serving its purpose today? Kenyans must rise up and ask Parliament to serve its purpose.
But how will we do that, given that these are the people we've put to represent us and they seem to be letting us down?
It's simple. It's only exploiting the mechanisms provided for in the Constitution. Remember, the Constitution has created the avenues of a person going to petition Parliament. How many people have presented private petitions in Parliament asking Parliament to give us a particular position in respect to the respect of the rule of law and the orders of the court? Let us not leave these things to parliamentarians alone and the committees.
All right. We'll have to wind up right there because of time. Professor Wajakoya and Ndegwa